6 broken pallets. That's all it was. Cracked wood, rusted nails, sitting in a pile behind a grocery store with a "free take it" sign taped to a shopping cart. Most people walked right past it that morning. One woman didn't. And by Sunday night, that exact pile of trash was seating 6 people around a dining table her own family didn't believe she'd built. This isn't a staged transformation video. This is what actually happens when someone with almost no woodworking experience, a cracked dining table she couldn't afford to replace, and a weekend deadline decides to stop scrolling past free wood posts and actually pick one up. Here's where it started. Her family's dining table, the one they'd had for 12 years, had a crack running straight down the middle that had gotten worse every month. A new farmhouse-style table like the one she wanted, the kind sold at furniture stores for anywhere from $900 to $1,500, simply wasn't in the budget that year. So when she saw a post in a local Buy Nothing group about a grocery store clearing pallets from a shipment, she didn't scroll past it. She drove over, loaded 6 of them into the back of her car, and admitted afterward she had absolutely no idea what she was doing. That uncertainty is actually the most important part of this story, because it's the same uncertainty almost everyone feels the first time they try something like this. And it's exactly why most people quit before they even make their first cut. What actually got her through it wasn't natural talent. It was pulling up a real, tested building plan before touching a saw. The same kind of plan from a library of over 16,000 tested woodworking projects, linked in the description below, built specifically so beginners don't have to guess their way through a project like this. Now, before diving into the build itself, here's something worth actually knowing if you ever plan to grab pallets yourself, because it's the one detail that separates a safe project from a genuinely bad idea. Every pallet is stamped somewhere on its frame under an international standard. Look for the letters HT, that means heat-treated, and it's safe for any furniture project, indoors or out. If you see MB, instead, that stands for methyl bromide, a chemical fumigant with no business anywhere near a surface people will eat off of. She checked every single board before it left the parking lot, and set aside 2 that weren't stamped at all, just to be safe. That's not a nice-to-know detail. That's the difference between furniture and a health hazard. Friday night was the ugly part nobody puts in a highlight reel. Pulling rusted nails out of splintered wood with pliers under a garage light. Sorting boards by length and condition on a tarp on the floor. Finding out that 2 of the 6 pallets were mostly rotted through and unusable, which meant working with less material than she'd planned for. By midnight, her hands were covered in small splinters. Her back hurt from bending over a tarp for 4 hours straight. And she said later she genuinely questioned whether this had been a mistake. It wasn't, but getting from that garage floor to a finished dining table took a specific kind of decision most people skip. Instead of eyeballing the tabletop and just screwing boards together side by side, the plan she was following called for something most beginners have never heard of: breadboard ends. It's a solid strip of wood attached across the grain at each end of a tabletop, and it exists for a real structural reason. Wood naturally expands and contracts with humidity across its width, but barely at all along its length. Without a breadboard end, a wide tabletop like this will slowly warp and cup over a single season as the seasons change. With one, engineered correctly with just enough play in the joint to let the wood move without cracking, the tabletop stays flat for years. That's not a decorative detail. That's the actual engineering reason old farmhouse tables from 100 years ago are still flat today, while plenty of modern flat-pack tables warp within 2 winters. She'd never heard of a breadboard end before that weekend. The plan told her exactly how wide to cut it, exactly where to drill the connecting holes, and exactly how much gap to leave for wood movement. The kind of detail that's genuinely hard to find right unless someone who's built dozens of these has already worked it out and written it down. By Saturday morning, the base frame was up, 4 legs, an apron connecting them, all cut from the straightest boards she'd salvaged. This is usually where beginners run into their first real wall, because a table base needs actual joinery, not just screws driven in wherever they'll hold. The plan called for pocket hole joints, which use an angled screw driven through a hidden hole to pull 2 boards together at a strong angle. Simple enough for a first-timer to learn in about 10 minutes, but strong enough to hold real weight for years, which is exactly why they're the standard beginner joint recommended in almost every serious woodworking plan for load-bearing furniture. By Saturday afternoon, she had a sturdy base and a stack of tabletop boards ready to join. And that's exactly where the real test of the whole project was about to happen. Because a wobbly base is annoying. But a warped, cracking tabletop is the kind of mistake you don't notice until months later, when it's already too late to fix without starting over completely. By Sunday morning, the boards were joined into a full tabletop, clamped tight overnight, so the glue could cure properly. A step the plan specifically warned her not to rush, since clamping under full pressure for less than the recommended time is one of the most common reasons a glued tabletop separates at the seams within the first few months of real use. Sanding took most of the morning. Not just a quick pass with fine grit paper, but working through several grits in order, starting rough enough to actually level the uneven pallet boards, then working progressively finer to remove the scratches the coarser paper left behind. Skip that progression, and stain soaks in unevenly, leaving blotchy patches that make a handmade piece look unfinished instead of intentional. She learned that the hard way on a scrap piece first, which is exactly why testing stain on an offcut before committing to the real tabletop is one of those small habits that prevents a genuinely ruined project. There was one more problem waiting for her, and it's the kind of thing that ends a lot of reclaimed wood projects right at the finish line: old nail holes. No matter how carefully you pull nails, the holes and small gouges are still there, and store-bought wood filler almost never matches reclaimed wood once it dries. It shows up as an obvious light patch under stain, practically glowing against the surrounding grain. The fix, straight from the plan, was almost embarrassingly simple. Mix fine sawdust from the exact same board with a small amount of wood glue until it forms a thick paste, then press it into the hole before it dries. Because the sawdust comes from the identical piece of wood, it takes stain at nearly the same rate as everything around it. It's a 5-minute trick most people never learn, and it's the difference between a table that looks intentionally rustic and one that looks like it's covered in patches. Now, this is the part of the story that actually matters most, because a table only around 60 seconds into most transformation videos gets shown finished, glossy, perfect. That's not what actually happened here, and it's not what happens for anyone building something like this for the first time. What made the difference between a table that would have wobbled apart within a year and one that's still holding steady today wasn't luck, and it wasn't skill she already had walking in. It was following an actual tested plan, the exact kind found in that library of over 16,000 woodworking projects linked in the description below. Instead of guessing joint angles and hoping for the best, the way most abandoned garage projects start out. Staining came Sunday afternoon. She chose a warm walnut tone, applied in thin, even coats with the grain, wiped back after a few minutes to avoid a blotchy, uneven finish. 2 coats of polyurethane on top, sanded lightly between coats with a fine grit to knock down any raised grain. A step that's easy to skip when you're excited to see the finished piece, and one that's the actual reason some handmade furniture feels glass smooth, while other pieces feel slightly rough no matter how much you sanded before staining. By Sunday evening, the table was standing in her dining room. 6 seats. A solid, flat top with breadboard ends holding it true. A base that didn't shift even when she leaned her full weight against one corner to test it. Her husband, who'd watched the whole weekend with quiet skepticism, admitted he genuinely thought she was going to end up with a pile of expensive-looking firewood in the garage. She sat down that night and actually did the math most people never bother doing. A comparable farmhouse dining table, the reclaimed wood style sold at specialty furniture stores, typically runs $900 to $1,500 depending on size and finish. Her total cost, screws, wood glue, sandpaper, stain, and polyurethane, came to just under $45. The wood itself, the single largest expense in any furniture project, was completely free. Here's what actually made the difference, and it's worth sitting with for a second if you've ever started a project like this and quietly abandoned it in a corner of the garage. It wasn't the free wood. Pallets like these sit behind stores in nearly every city, ignored by almost everyone who walks past them. It wasn't talent, because she'd never built anything before that weekend. The entire gap between a pile of broken pallets and a finished dining table that seats 6 people came down to one decision made before the first cut: following a real, tested plan instead of guessing her way through it. Most people who try a project like this quit around the second or third mistake, not because the work itself is too hard, but because they're improvising every measurement with no way to know if what they're building will actually hold. The project gets pushed into a corner, and people quietly decide DIY furniture isn't for them. That's not a skill problem. That's a missing plan problem, and it's completely fixable before you ever pick up a saw. If you're sitting on a wobbly table, an empty room, or a pile of free wood you don't know what to do with yet, the exact library of plans used throughout this build, 16,000 tested projects, from dining tables to full furniture sets, is linked in the description and pinned comment below. Sometimes the table your family will use for the next 20 years isn't sitting in a store. It's sitting behind a grocery store, free, just waiting for the right plan to bring it home.